Okay, so last time we talked about paired data sets and this correlation coefficient, uh, and I mentioned some of its properties, and I gave a quick proof of the fact that R is less than 1 in absolute value, less than or equal to 1 in absolute value. So I had asked the tutors to discuss this proof in class. The tutorials, I hope they did. Yes, is there a question? Someone is unmuted. Please mute yourself. Okay. So I hope, as I said, they discussed, the tutors discussed this in the tutorial. But let me mention something which is important in this context, which is the idea that correlation does not imply causation. You might have heard this phrase in other contexts. This is just saying that if two, so in the context of our data sets, if xi and yi are, yes, question? So if xi and yi are positively correlated, so i.e. if rxy is greater than 0, so that's it's positive, then x and y are positively correlated. That does not imply that one of them caused the other. I mean, this is kind of obvious because correlation is a symmetric relation. X is positively correlated with y is equivalent to saying y is positively correlated with x. But causation says that x caused y, and that is antisymmetric. X caused y cannot imply that y caused x, right? Because there's a temporal notion here. So this is obvious, but and many of you will say, yeah, of course, why are you telling us this? But very often you will find misuse of statistics, and people will say things which of this nature, and you should always be suspicious of such things. So, for example, I look at, I'm just reading out your exercise 36 from chapter 2. The problem states that in a study in children in grades 2 through 4, a researcher gave each student a reading test. While looking at the resulting data, the researcher noticed a positive correlation between a student's reading test score and height. The researcher concluded that taller children read better because they can more easily see the blackboard. So this is an example of such a fallacy, because the word there, the operative word there is because, right? So he says because taller children can easily see the blackboard, they necessarily perform better on reading tests. So that's a causation statement, and so you should always be suspicious about drawing conclusions from data, in particular implications of causation. So on Wikipedia there's an entire article on this subject, and there are four classes of examples given. In one case, the conclusion is A causes B, but in fact B causes A. In another case, there's a third factor which is a common cause between A and B. In some cases, both cause each other, and in some cases, it's just a pure coincidence. Okay, so you should.
So,
yes.
This may be true in some cases, right? Because in the case of 36, it may be true that the students have more height can read more
No,
better.
it might be true, but you have to say, you have to perform a more careful analysis.
Okay.
That's right. So it is correct that it might actually be true that A causes B, but uh, but you need to do some more checks. I mean, it's not, you cannot just draw that conclusion from just calculating the R value. Okay, you have to do a more careful analysis. You don't get such a conclusion for free.
So
Okay.
in that situation, it can be possible that the taller child are already like on the higher side of age, so they are taller and like have more mental capacity.
Right. So that's correct. So they are possibly older. That could be one issue. So look also at exercise 37, the last exercise from chapter 2. You will see another interesting problem with that kind of argument. Okay. All right. So let me see also exercise 37. I'm not reading it now, but okay, you should look at it. Okay, so this ends our discussion of chapter 2. So I'm now moving on to chapter 3. Okay, so far we have discussed gathering of data and very basic analysis of data using some qualitative, visual and quantitative aspects. Now we want to move on to a more systematic study of the data, and this is where probability theory is going to come in. So chapter 3 is all about the fundamentals of probability theory. So I will introduce this formally, but before that let me just say that there are many different interpretations of the word probability. So let me discuss two main interpretations of the word probability, of the term probability. So let me give you one example. So let me say, so let's say I say that based on the weather today, or let me just say, I say that there's a 30% chance, 30% probability. I will write prob for probability of raining tomorrow. So what does this mean? I mean so this sentence is already is a bit problematic because so even in this class there will be many of you who will not interpret this sentence the same way, or rather all of you will interpret this statement differently. So let me give you two main interpretations. Okay, so the first one is called the frequency interpretation. So what it says, or what it counts is, or how it interprets this statement is the following. So among all days with similar weather conditions, I believe that 0.3 of them will lead to rain the next day. Okay, that is to say, I have lived on this earth for a fairly large amount of time, and that counts as a lot of days. And I have some experience of this world, and I look outside my window, I see these clouds, and generally gloomy weather here in Bangalore, and I say, okay, I have subconsciously collected data for so many of these days, and so this uh, among all days that have similar weather patterns. So maybe there were 1,000 of those, I don't know, and 300 of those it rained the next day. Okay, so I have not done any calculations. I'm just saying what this kind of statement implies at the back of one's mind. Okay, so this is a frequency interpretation because I am doing a calculation somewhere in the back of my mind. I have actually I have some quantitative data to back up my statement. Okay, so this is the frequency interpretation, and this should remind you of experiments in the natural sciences. So um, um, so for example, you perform a certain experiment and you see what happens, and so this is like or an observation, and this is like one of those things. Okay, the other interpretation, which is very different, is the subjective or Bayesian interpretation. And what it says is the following. So point 3 is a quantitative measure of my belief that it will rain tomorrow. So this is a number associated to something that is very subjective, that I believe, okay, will rain tomorrow. In contrast to this, I mean, these might maybe seem similar to you, but actually they're very different. So here, one is actually supposing that one has done some kind of calculation, and that calculation is the same for everybody, because let's suppose for argument's sake that I have lived in Bangalore all my life, and anybody else who lived in Bangalore all their lives could also, in principle, get a similar number, whereas this could be completely arbitrary. Okay, and it's subjective, it's something pertinent to you, in this case to me. Okay, so these are very different, and I don't want to get too much into it, but just to tell you that both of these are widespread. So roughly,
Sir,
yes,
how did the person making the statement come up with the number 0.3?
that's me. I made up that number. That's my belief. Okay, it's my
yes, sir, but
I mean, you
is there
cannot
any
question
measure?
that. No, it's my belief.
Okay, sir.
Yeah. So so that is taken as as something as axiomatic. There is a belief there, and to that belief I assign this number. Okay. So roughly, A is believe A is the interpretation adopted more commonly. Let's say A adopted more commonly by people by scientists, by natural scientists, let's say. So physicists, chemists, mathematicians tend to believe more. I mean, again, there's no hard and fast rule. And B is adopted more commonly by social scientists. And again, there is no, as I want to emphasize that this is just, again, if you want, this is my belief. Okay. But both have problems. So for A, the problem is that you cannot perform, I mean, to get this notion of probability firmly, even though this is kind of objective, it's to assign a probability, you have to do in principle infinitely many experiments, which you cannot do. So we cannot ever perform infinitely many experiments or observations. Right? We always have finite amount of data. I mean, this is related to the problem I mentioned in the very first class, which is I give you a coin and you have to tell me whether it is fair or not. Of course, if you did infinitely many experiments, infinitely many coin tosses, you could tell me, but we cannot do that. So you have only a finite amount of data. I mean, yes, I have lived a long time on this planet, but that's still finite amount of data, and we will see that with finitely many data, finite amount of data, you cannot possibly say anything with certainty. For B, there's a problem of subjectivity. So there's no guarantee of coherence. So the way Bayesian people work is that they constantly update their beliefs. So they start with something called a prior belief, prior probability, and they constantly compute posteriors. So based on what they observe, they keep updating their belief. Okay, but this is problematic for several reasons, and let me not get into it. I mean, this is a, one can keep talking philosophy, but one needs to get back to mathematics at some point. So let me just point out to this interesting issue that I think Pascal raised, or Laplace raised, which is the question which is called the sunrise problem, and which is just the question, what is the probability that the sun will rise tomorrow? I mean, it seems like a silly question, but at the time, this was in the 18th century, so there was celestial mechanics was not known, but you could as well consider, you could as well forget whatever you know about the laws of motion and just ask this question, what's the probability that the sun will rise tomorrow? And there's a discussion on Wikipedia about this. So you can take a look at this. Okay, so all of these are problematic. There's no, this is philosophy of probability is still an active subject. So there, and I should say there are other also interpretations. These are the two main ones. Okay, so none of them is absolutely sacrosanct, and but we will not get into all this. So as a mathematician, we will develop the theory formally. Okay, so I don't want to say much more about the philosophy of probability. Those of you who are interested can read up. There's a, so we will sweep philosophical issues under the rug. Okay, I'm not going to discuss too much of this. I mean, of course, I mean, it's good to think about such things. I'm not dissuading you from thinking about it, but I don't want to, get bogged down in such discussions. At some point, it becomes a notion of semantics, and then one just keeps arguing forever. Okay, so we will develop the theory formally. So what I'm going to do now, so as you might have experienced from your maths courses in your last last 2 semesters, mathematicians like to work with a set of axioms. So we start with some set of axioms, and then we develop the theory systematically. That's the way things are usually done. So I will now give you some definitions to formalize the process of to formalize what we mean by probability. Okay, so we will axiomatize everything, and some of this will be familiar to you from set theory, but we will still do it, just to be on the same page. Okay, so we'll start with a notion of an experiment. So an experiment or trial, this is different from your physics experiments. Okay, this is the probabilistic notion of experiment, is any procedure that can, in principle, be repeated infinitely often, and which has a well-defined set of outcomes. I mean, this is such a basic definition that it's bound to go circular. I mean, experiment. I'm using procedure. What does procedure mean? You could say that, and then we could go round and round. But I hope the general thrust of this definition is clear. So it's something that you can do infinitely often, at least as a thought experiment. So, for example, coin tosses. Right? So let me give some running examples. So the first one is to toss a coin. Oh, damn. Okay, I should say one more thing before I go on to the examples. Okay. This well-defined, this set of outcomes is called the sample space. And it's usually denoted as. Okay. Right. So an experiment will give you a well-defined set of outcomes, and this set of outcomes is the sample space. So all your physics experiments, for example, come under this. I mean, for example, you measure the height of a building, for example. It's going to give you some positive real number in whatever units, fix your units, like that. So if you have a deterministic experiment, that is something that always gives you the same answer, that's also okay. Then the set is a singleton. That's also allowed. Okay. So that is subsumed under here, but many things that are not physics experiments are also here. Okay. All right. So coming back to our examples. So here's you toss a coin, and here my set of outcomes is heads or tails. Okay. So I want to stress that we do not consider things like the coin falling on the edge. Okay. Those things are not allowed. Those things are not allowed in the sense they are not part of our framework. So for us, a coin is this imaginary thing, and when we toss, every time you toss, either heads will appear or tails will appear. Okay. All right.
Sir,
Yes, please feel free.
then will eating a banana or having a bath, things like that, also count as an experiment or trial?
No, but then you have to tell me what the well-defined set of outcomes is. So what is
Okay,
the
so
what is the outcome?
okay, probably for eating a banana, probably the banana is not good, or the banana is
Huh?
the person is able to eat the banana, or the person is not able to eat the banana because it has some it is infested or something.
Yeah, maybe you can. Yeah, sure. You could say something like that. Yeah, you either eat the banana or don't eat the banana. Sure. You could say something like that. Yeah. I mean, it's not particularly useful as far as I can see. But yeah, sure. No harm.
Yes.
Another example, another running example is to throw a die. So, a die, remember from your childhood, is the six-sided thing that you, cubical thing that you throw, which has numbers 1 through 6 on its six sides. So many people say dice, but actually dice is the plural of die. So there's one die and two dice. Okay, and here the sample set, sample space is the numbers 1 through 6. Again, we do not allow the die to fall on an edge. Okay. So another example is, let's say, the length of time until the stylus stops working. The stylus with which I am writing these notes. Okay. In that case, S is some positive real number in whatever units. Okay. Of course, I mean, it won't last decades, right? I mean, it will in principle last in practice last only, I don't know, a couple of years at most. So, you know, so you could say some subset of this set also. That's also. Another example one can say is toss two coins or toss a coin twice. So then the sample space has 4 elements, and I distinguish heads, and I distinguish heads, tails, and tails, heads. Okay, because my 2 coins are distinct. Okay. Okay, so now you have this experiment and you have the sample space. Okay, so let me also. Okay, so the next thing is what happens when you do the experiment. So the result of an experiment, the result of an experiment is called an outcome. Let's say, oops, sorry. Denoted small s. Okay, then by definition, our small s belongs to capital S. Right? Because we said that it has a well-defined set of outcomes, and this is one of them. So, again, going back to our previous example, you toss a coin. It could fall heads. Heads is one outcome. You throw a die. You know, it fell 3, for example. In the third case, the stylus maybe lasts 3 years and 2 days. And in the last example, maybe it fell head tail. Just just to show you what can happen. So, okay, so it might seem that the natural thing to study are outcomes at this point, but actually it turns out that these are not the natural things. The natural things are what are called events. So an event E is a subset of the sample space. Of course, all outcomes are singleton events, but it will turn out, I cannot discuss that in this course, but those of you who study this further will see that events are more natural than outcomes. Okay, so again, let's go back to our example. I can say the event is the singleton age. I can say in the case of a die throw that I have an even number. In the case of my stylus, I can say at least my stylus lasts at least 2 months. I would prefer that. So then this is the subset which is greater than or equal to 2 months. Right? It's the subset of R plus, which is starts at 0 and starts at 2 months and goes all the way to infinity. And in this, the last case, I can say both coins are different. Both tosses are different. So as I said, event subsumes outcomes because all singleton sets are outcomes, but this is a better thing to study. All right. So note that both the empty set and the entire sample space are also events. Why? The empty set is the impossible event. Which is that nothing happened. Or nothing happens. Right? So you did the experiment, nothing happened. So that's not possible in our framework. So this is the impossible event also. And S is the certain event. Namely, something happens. So when you did the experiment, something has to happen. Right? So because of this well-definedness, we have a well-defined set of outcomes in our experiment. Okay. So any questions so far about these basic definitions? Okay, very good. So now we come to the framework of set theory. So now we can use all the things that we know from set theory, elementary set theory that you learned in school, high school or whatever. So let E and F be events. Okay. And the first thing, let's say E union F is the event that either E or F occurs. Okay, so here I am using the inclusive OR. So you might have learnt of XOR, exclusive OR, in your computer science course. This is the inclusive OR. So just to clarify, just to make sure everybody is on the same page, both are allowed to occur. That is, so we do allow both E and F to occur. Okay. So this you might have seen in your Venn diagram. So here is E and here is F. Then this is the color. This is the union. And similarly, E intersection F, which we will denote as EF. So whenever we write two sets together, or if you want, we're taking a product of events, then they mean intersection. So this is the event that both E and F occur. So both must occur, right? So again, from your Venn diagrams in school, here is E, here is F, and then this is the small thing here, which lives on the intersection. Okay. Oh,
Hello, sir.
yes.
So what is that, the sign, what does that mean after you written E intersection F?
Oh, this is the definition. So,
Okay, okay.
so A colon equals B, A colon equals something means A by definition is equal to that. Okay, I'm not claiming something here. I'm saying this is the definition of EF. Okay. Otherwise, we have not defined what product of two sets is. Right? I mean, this notation doesn't make sense unless I say what it is.
Okay, sir.
Yeah. Okay. E complement. Let me say E complement. Or let me underline it. Denoted E superscript C, small c, is the event that E does not occur. Right. So again, so here if this whole thing is S and here is E, then this thing will be complete. Okay. By the way, one thing I should have said earlier, thankfully I have some space. If EF is empty, that is E intersection F is the empty set, then E and F are said to be mutually exclusive. Okay. Right. Again, obvious things. Okay. Last thing I will say here is that if we have an infinite collection of events, E1, E2, etc., are events, then two things. Union, the infinite union of EIs, or EN, sorry. So this is E1, union E2, union E3, etc., etc., consists of outcomes that are in EM for some natural number M, and intersection n equals 1 to infinity En. Again, this means E1 intersect E2 intersect E3, etc. So this consists of all outcomes that are in all En. Okay, that belong to every single En. Okay. Right. So these are the basic notions from set theory that we will repeatedly use. So we said that
Hello,
in
sir.
event, yes.
So why are we defining only for the intersection? Why are we defining the EF, the product of the two sets? So why are you defining for only the intersection?
What do you mean only intersection?
So you said that E intersection
one?
F,
Yeah.
it's defined for. So why are we defining it for only E intersection F? Why are we not defining it for E union F?
Okay. So, well, of course, only means I can only use this notation once, no? I cannot say it both. But okay, so I see what you mean. So it turns out that it's more logical to think of intersection as product and union as sum. So this you could say is E plus F in some sense. There's a correspondence which makes it more natural to think of intersection as product. Okay?
Okay, sir. Yeah.
It's more natural to think of union as addition. Actually. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So we have seen. So what we said so far is that events are subsets, and we have then the usual things that we can do with subsets of a given set. You can take its complement, union, intersection, etc. But a surprising thing, and this is why we need events instead of outcomes. So I'll say this, but I will not discuss this too much. In general, if we work in the most general framework of sets, not all subsets of S can be events. So this might be a bit surprising for you. It turns out that it is not possible to take it's not possible to work in a framework of probability where we allow every possible thing to be an event. Okay, we do need certain properties to hold, and this precludes all subsets in general. For finite subsets, for finite sets S, there's no problem. But in general, in full generality, this won't work. And as I said, these such things I cannot discuss within the framework of this course. Okay. So the framework which within which we will work is the following. So a collection. Okay. So before that, maybe I'll just define some. I don't know if this is common knowledge, so let me just say it. Notation. We use 2 to the S. Okay, I mean 2 is a number and S is a set, so this does not make sense a priori. So we use 2 to the S to mean the collection of all subsets. And if you have seen this before, fine. If you have not, this is maybe new to you. Okay. No, of course not. If you're not and notice that I'm using collection instead of sets. I mean, those you might have seen this in your 101 that sets of sets are problematic. So one doesn't use the same term. Okay. Okay. So
Sir,
yes.
sir, the sample space is how do we construct the sample space by doing the trial experiment and all the events, and we collect and call it as the sample space. So if all the subsets of the sample space are not events, then what is the other way to construct the sample space in the first place?
No, sample space just consists of outcomes. So don't get confused. So the set of outcomes is the sample space. So you say that what are the possible things that can happen, and then that forms the sample space. Okay, but I'm going to now tell you how to think about events in this context. So your question is timely. So let me give this definition. So a collection F, which is some collection of subsets with the properties with the following properties. First is that the empty set should belong to F. The second is if I have a countably infinite collection of events, E1 and E1, E2 belong to F, implies that union n equals 1 to infinity, En belongs to F, and C, if an event belongs to F, then its complement belongs to F. So if I have these three properties, such a collection is called a sigma algebra or sigma field. So that's you'll find this term in older books. Nowadays it's more common to refer to it as a sigma algebra. Okay, so
Excuse me, sir.
yes.
Sir, if all events E1, E2, and so on belong to the set, why would the reunion necessarily belong to the?
No, this is the axiom. I'm saying
yes, sir,
a
but
collection which satisfies these three properties is called a sigma algebra.
yes, sir, but why is there a need to specify the axiom B?
Okay. So
why can't it be proved?
Why can't it be?
Why can't it be proved? Like if all elements belonging to event
No,
E1
they cannot
and
prove
all.
anything. I mean, I'm defining a collection which satisfies this property. How can you prove any such thing? This is an axiom. I'm saying any collection with these properties is called a sigma algebra. How can you prove such a thing?
So because if all elements of E1 lie in F and all elements of E2 lie in F, then their union must.
No, all elements of E1 do not lie in F. Let's not get confused. F is a subset of the collection of all subsets. So F is a collection of subsets or events. Okay?
Okay. Yes, sir. Yes.
So I'm saying these are events, and I'm saying that I want this property that if I have a bunch of events in F, their union should belong to F. This property should be satisfied. Okay? All right. So you can. So maybe I'll ask you to show that S must belong to F. Can anybody see this from the properties?
So we use the second and the third property together.
Second and third. Second for what?
Not second, first and third. First and third property together.
That's right. So the empty set belongs to F. by assumption, and we have the property that if the empty set if any event belongs to F, its complement, and the complement of the empty set is the entire set.
So we can also use the second and third. So from the third, we know that if some set belongs to, if some event belongs to F, then its complement also belongs to F. And
Yes.
since E and E complement belong to F, their union has to belong to F. So S belongs to F.
That's right. Yes, that's correct. But the only problem with that argument is you assume the existence of an event. So that a non-trivial event. So that need not be the case. So it's good that you mentioned that. So let me give you some examples of sigma fields, sigma algebras, or trivial examples, or not trivial but easy examples. The first example for which your proof will not work is the sigma algebra consisting only of the empty set and S. And here you see all the axioms are satisfied. The empty set belongs to F. If E belongs to F, then its complement does, really. And if I take any collection, then its union is either, if I only take this again and again, I'll get phi. If I take S even once, then I'll get this.
E can be phi, right? So that argument still holds. Does E have to be a non-trivial argument? Can't phi also be an event in F?
Yeah, but then you are using A. Yeah, so then you are implicitly using A, so then you are giving the same proof. Okay, so another example, as I said, when S is finite, I can take F to be 2 to the S. Okay. Right, so in this case, well, every single subset of S is an event. So certainly everything is an event. All unions are events. The empty set is there. Any set is there. Its complement is there. So there's no. Okay. So I cannot do this for if S is infinite. I cannot take such a thing, and the reason for that we cannot discuss at this point. Okay. So now we are in a position to say what a probability is. Okay, so with all this blah blah, I can now define a probability. Okay, so given a sample space S, and a sigma algebra F on it, a probability function or a probability measure by the way, I'm using probability measure, right? Not just measure. Is a function P. I'll use this P from F to closed 0, 1, which satisfies properties first one, the probability of the empty set is 0, the probability of S is 1, and secondly, if E1, E2, etc. are mutually exclusive, So I have said what it means for two events to be mutually exclusive. Here this means that En is empty for all m less than n. Okay. So any two pairs, for any two pairs, their intersection. Okay, so if E1, E2, etc. are mutually exclusive, then the probability of their union is the sum of them. Okay, that's it. Okay, I should maybe just say, I don't know whether okay, the triple S, the sample space, sigma algebra, and this probability measure or function is called a probability space. Okay, so I'll just give some examples and then we'll stop. Okay, so let's go back to our running examples. So the first one was tossing a coin. So here, remember S was HT, and now here it's natural for me to take F to be 2 to the S. Okay, and now I give you two probability functions. One, so here, okay, so it's yeah, okay. So since I have taken F is 2 to the S, enough. So it's enough to define P on outcomes, because any event is a union of singletons, which are my outcomes. So then if I give you the probability of every single outcome, I'm done. So in the first case, I give P of H is P of T is half. So this is what is commonly called a fair coin. And another example would be P of H equals, say, 2/5, and P of T equals 3/5. And this is an example of a biased coin. So they are unequal. So our framework allows us to define, allows us to include things like biased coins, which you might not have seen how to do up there. Okay, so coming back to our example of die. So here S is 1 through 6, and again I'll take F is 2 to the S. So again I can define all my outcomes. So let's say P of I equals 1/6 for all I. Okay, so this is a fair die.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
So can the sigma algebra be anything other than 2 to the power S?
Yes, of course. I'll
So
discuss this. Yeah. Go ahead.
So I want an example, like what?
I'll discuss examples in the next class.
Okay.
I'm out of time. Let me just finish this and I'll stop here. So here, so remember I had given you the event. So E is the event that the die is even. So the E is an even number. The die lands on an even number. So in that case, this is 2, 4, 6, and so P of E is 3 times 1/6, which is half. Right? So this is how one can calculate probabilities of events starting from this framework. Okay. So in the next class we will prove some properties of the probability function. Any
So
questions?
in the axiom B, do we define the probabilities of individual ENs using the notion that we have from high school, like probability of 1 is 1/6 in this case, and so on?
No, but that's not necessary. No, you could have a loaded die where these are not all ones.
Okay.
So you
yes.
have to tell me what the probability function is for me. You have to tell me what the sigma algebra is, and you have to give me a probability function that satisfies this property, these two properties. If it doesn't, then this is not a probability function, and then
Okay.
we are not talking about the same thing. Okay.
Sir,
Our
and
framework relies on these assumptions, these axioms.
yes, sir. Sir, and you have defined a function, like you have defined the domain of the probability function to be a collection, which may not be a set. So is it necessary? Would it necessarily be a set, or is it something?
Yeah, I mean, don't worry about such things. I mean, we just use the term collection to avoid possible confusion. But I mean, this domain is it takes subsets to real numbers between 0. That's all. That's all is relevant.
Yes, sir. Okay. Thank you, sir.
Any other questions?
Sir?
Yes.
Sir, we are going to study the probability theory using this sigma algebra framework, or this is just one of the example of the frameworks which can be used?
Well, this is the example, or this is, let's say, the most, by far the most common paradigm for studying probability. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Due to Kolmogorov, if you want to. Okay. Anything else? Okay. So then let me stop sharing and stop recording.